Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Chris Dost. I'm the CEO of Sabra Global Education. Thanks so much for joining me here today. Recently, I had the opportunity of interviewing Dr. Robert A. Harris, professor of Bible and Ancient Semitic Languages at the Jewish Theological Seminary. And in this video, we talk about his scholarly journey, some of his research, and also about his upcoming course for Sabra Global Education, which will deal with Jewish and Christian interpretations of the Song of Songs throughout history. And after you watch this interview, I'm sure you're going to want to know how to sign up for the course. Well, the link is in the description below, so just scroll down and you can click the link to register for his course, find out more about it. And I think you'll agree with me after watching this video that this upcoming course promises to be a truly transformative experience for how we read the Bible. All right, let's get started with the interview. Well, Robbie, thanks so much for making time to meet with me, to converse with me here today. And I know that everybody who's watching is going to be blessed by it.
Chris, the pleasure's all yours.
Yes, it is, indeed. And in fact, you and I first met, I want to say in 2007.
I was going to say 15 years ago.
Yeah. So
we were both younger.
That's right. We were both younger. Yeah. And I was in the MA in Bible and Semitic Languages, I think we called it then, the Bible and Semitics program at JTS, and I took your Isaiah class, and it was my first time studying with a rabbi because, I came in from a Christian background. Well, here we are, so you didn't scare me off. And no, it was actually a fantastic class because that was the first time I had ever been exposed to the Parshanim, medieval rabbinic interpretation. Sure. And so we spent that class, I think, going through the Isaiah diary, the first, 12 chapters.
First 12 chapters, yes.
Right.
I've also done the Isaiah 40 through 48 segment. For second Isaiah, but that class was, as H.L. Ginsburg called it, the Hayoman Shel Yeshayahu Hanavi, the diary of Isaiah the prophet.
Yeah, and it was fantastic. And one of the things I loved about you is that you were able to combine the best of scholarship, from a historical critical perspective, which is what I'd really come to JTS for. But at the same time, you introduced me to medieval rabbinic interpretation, which really, we'll talk about some of that tonight.
Sure.
And just opened up a whole new world of biblical interpretation for me. But you also brought the element of humor and even brought a little rock and roll to the class.
Me?
Imagine that. Right. Yes. Imagine that. So, but these days. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I had the great Ed Greenstein as my doctoral advisor, and Ed always referenced popular music in his class because he said that the ancient Israelite writers were people of their own conventions, just like the Brill Building writers doing pop music in the early 60s. You know what I mean? He would always have these references. We'd do some Ugaritic poem, right? And then, Goffin King from the Bill Building in 1962.
Yeah, well, apparently that rubbed off on you, I guess, right?
It did.
So why don't we start by having you just talk a little bit about how you got into scholarship to begin with?
Sure. Well, I was born in 1955. How far back do you want to go? I didn't grow up religious. I didn't grow up speaking Hebrew. I knew how to read the letters for my bar mitzvah kind of thing. We always had a very strong Jewish identity. And I wanted to go to Israel in 1973. And I was working in a Baskin Robbins for $1.50 an hour that whole year. And, I didn't have quite enough money to go. And a rabbi in our area in Bethesda, I wasn't even a member, but I hung out at that synagogue. He gave me $300, about 1/4 of the price, to go to Israel, just out of his discretionary fund. And I never forgot that, right? And while I was in Israel, doing the travel, visit a kibbutz, go to an archaeological dig kind of thing. Who wouldn't, right? Mm-hmm. I went to 2 lectures by the great Shalom Paul, who was a conservative rabbi who got a PhD, I think, at Penn and made Aliyah, moved to Israel in 1970 and was at the Hebrew University. Two dynamic lectures, which so excited me about Bible. And I was speaking to a friend of mine. He said, you should read John Bright, The History of Israel, and open up a Bible every time he cites a verse, which is like 20 times a page in that volume. Right. So I spent all that summer after that, I only could do it in English at the time, but reading Bible. I got very enthusiastic about Bible study. And the second thing is I went to this program where they introduced, I was going to be a senior in high school. So where was I going to go to college? And they said there was this program. You could go at the same time you went to Columbia University, you could go to the Jewish Theological Seminary and get 2 BAs at the same time. You had to do a lot of extra work, but, right. And I went, oh, well, Columbia, that's great school. And what is this Jewish Theological Seminary thing? So that's how I ended up at the seminary. Wow. I went to Columbia and I got a bachelor's in ancient history. And by that point at the seminary, I thought, well, I knew how to study. I knew how to study Bible on my own, but I didn't know what Talmud was. So I became a Talmud major and studied the Talmud for the next 4 years. You know what I mean? And graduated, 1978 with these 2 degrees. And then what was I going to be when I grow up? I went into theater, which is, one of my big loves. My father thought, I won't tell you what my father thought. They were not happy thoughts, let us say. Yeah. And eventually I went back to rabbinical school, and moved to Israel, got married, moved to Israel. I met my wife at Hebrew University when I was floating around studying there. And you know what I mean? At that point, there I was a rabbi. It was now 1985. I was living in Haifa, first on a kibbutz and then in Haifa. And I went up to Jerusalem one day to go to a meeting and went with a friend. And I had to take a bus back to Haifa at the end of the day. And I didn't have a book with me, so I went to the bookstore and I spot this book, The Study of the Bible in the Middle Ages. So I thought, okay, it's Rashi, all my right. I put the book in my book bag very quickly. The bus goes down to the bottom of the mountain, and I open up this book and I go, oh my God, this was Christian exegesis. It wasn't Rashi. It was all these guys I'd never heard of. But there I am on the bus. I got this book. I read it for the next 2.5 hours. I walked into my apartment in Haifa and I said, Nellie, I gotta take a course in Latin at Haifa University because they're doing the same thing we are. And that's when I started studying Latin. And within, a year or so, I thought, I got to do a PhD in this. Enough of this being a rabbi business. Right. So I got a fellowship. I came back to the States with my 2 little kids. I took a small congregation in Westchester County in Pelham to I would say put bacon on the table, but you get the point. I had to provide for my family and studied, got this doctorate in Bible. And then what was I going to do? I moved back to Israel to write the dissertation because who wouldn't? I got a fellowship there. Right. And we lived in Israel again a couple of years. And eventually I got the doctorate and I thought, well, gosh, what am I going to be when I grow up? I didn't go back to theater at that point. I got a job at the seminary and right. moved back to New York in 1997. And that's where I've been. That's how you met me a few years later.
So talk to us a little bit about your upcoming course on Song of Songs that you're going to be offering.
Sure.
How is it that you're going to approach Song of Songs?
Well, I tried to be multifaceted because I want to respect a lot of the different traditions and ways of reading. The rabbis have this saying, there are 70 facets of the Torah, which means they're not a multitude, an infinite number of possible ways of studying scripture. So with the Song of Songs, if you or I were reading it, just kind of plain reading it, gosh, it's just replete with love scenes and spring and love making in the countryside and sneaking around our parents' homes, because we're talking about an unmarried couple or more than one, right? So we would see this and we go, wow, this is like, I talked about Carole King before. These are love songs of the ancient biblical period.
Right.
But very early, both rabbis and Christian church fathers, they were very uncomfortable. Why would sacred scripture have something to say about plain old lovemaking, right? It wasn't seemly to them. So beginning with figures like Origen in 3rd century land of Israel and his rabbinic contemporaries, they created allegories out of this book, right? The love of the Song of Songs was really Christ's love for the church, right? And you had to understand the whole idea of allegory is to say it can operate, meaning can operate on a different level altogether. I'll give examples of this in the first part of class. I sometimes talk about Animal Farm, which is a handy way of thinking it, because we all read Animal Farm in whatever, 9th grade, in the public school system in this country. And we know intuitively that it's not really a story about pigs and donkeys. And, it's really a profoundly dark story about Europe in 1939 on the eve of World War II. And we only know that because of this idea of allegory. Right. So the book operates both as a barnyard tale, but something much more profound. Right. So the ancient rabbis and the Christian churchmen thought about the Song of Songs in that way. It wasn't just about, or really even primarily about the love story. It was about the profound teachings of, again, for Christianity, Christ's love for the church. For the rabbis, it was God's love for the Jewish people. Right. And they even chose the same terms. How do you say a church in Latin? Ecclesiam, right? My pronunciation might not be great, but it's a gathering together of people. Right. So in Hebrew, it was Knesset Israel, the gathering of Israel. Except it was a Jewish story, the Exodus from Egypt, the revelation of Torah on Mount Sinai, the gift of Eretz Israel, the land of Israel. And each of those stories, of course, culminates in the Messiah. For Christians, it's the second coming of the Messiah, of course. For Jews, it's the first coming.
Thanks for joining us for this interview. I really appreciate your taking time out to watch it, to support our channel, and I strongly encourage you to consider registering for Dr. Harris's upcoming class on Song of Songs. You can find the link in the description below.